Thank you for coming to the session this evening. Yat Ryan Barton and Shia. Nanish Takabahan the Schlink, Anani Tukudich Uni Bashashin, Tukudich Uni Dasha Che. Ekehet Nakasa Kegi. My name is Ryan Barton, and I work with the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources in the Water Management Branch as a hydrologist, and my office is based out of Fort Defiance, Arizona. And I've been with the Navajo Nation for over 6 years as a hydrologist. And today, this session, we are going to be presenting with my panelists, Emma Robbins, and with Arash Moalemi. And Emma is with the Executive Director of Navajo Water Project with DigDeep. And Arash is with the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. And so I would like to frame this discussion and have it be more interactive among the participants, and maybe you would like to share some of your own successes or challenges with collaborating with infrastructure projects with many collaborators. And you are all here and we are here, and I think what brings us all together is our passion for infrastructure to bring to our tribal communities. And this is one of those a takeaway that we would like to emphasize and share with you from our own different perspectives of interacting with the different stakeholders, with me from the Navajo Nation, with Emma Robbins from a nonprofit, and with Arash Moalemi with the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. And I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves. We'll begin with you, Arash.
Okay, very good. Yate Ryan, and thank you for the introduction. Arash Nathan Moalemi Yenishe, Tohai Lini Nishle, Persian Clan Bashichin, Kia Ani Dashache, Persian Clan Dashanali. I am the Deputy General Manager for NTUA Generation. I've been with NTUA for just a little over 10 years. Previously, I was General Counsel for NTUA, and prior to that, I worked at the Navajo Nation Judicial Branch in Winter Rock, Arizona. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emma Robbins. Happy New Year, Arash, to you and your family. She'eya Emma Robbins Yenishya, Bilagana Sant Dana Enishle, Hashkan Hadzoche Bashish Chin, Bilagana Sant Dana Edashache, Ado Nakhaidren Dashinale, Nane Ahasane De Nasha, Ado Los Angeles Dishagan, Navajo Water Project, Benashnishdo, Benat Anishle. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Ryan. I'm from Cameron, grew up in Tuba City, live in LA, where DigDeep Water is headquartered. DigDeep Water is a human rights organization that works with the 2.2 people living in the United States who don't have access to clean running water in their homes. And that includes our relatives on the Navajo Nation. I oversee all of the work that we do on the nation, and very grateful to our Pechanga relatives for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And bringing infrastructure to these remote communities involves a lot of collaboration. And with 27,000 square miles, you know, that's a big lift. And to bring, one of the first things before you can get water is you want to have electricity, and then water follow it after. So just to give you a sense of this area that we are talking about, let me go ahead and share with you a map of the Navajo Nation and where we are speaking of. So this is a arc map of the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo Nation has 110 chapters. And the way to think about it would be maybe a county within a state. And so we have 110 chapters. And I myself am from Indian Wells, which is, just to give you a sense, like in this area, that's where I was born and raised. And so we do cover a lot of area, and we are in 3 different states, and within those states, we are in multiple counties within those states. So because of the vastness and the different jurisdictions, you do have to be, you work with many partners, and even with like the Eastern Agency on the eastern side is very checkerboard, and then you are needing to work with like the Bureau of Land Management and all the other stakeholders. So at this time, we'll let Arash give his presentation and introduction into the work that NTUA.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, folks. So yeah, first off, thank you to Ryan for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. Thank you to Emma, and also thank you once again to our Pechanga relatives for allowing, for hosting the event. So, this conversation, focuses on collaborative efforts between stakeholders. So I'll kind of give a background of NTUA and the Navajo Nation, and then talk about some some case studies that we've done for collaborating with internal and external groups to help benefit our Navajo customers and our NTUA customers. Okay. So the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority was created in 1959. It is a not-for-profit enterprise of the Navajo Nation. So at the time, there was a great need for obviously utilities across the Navajo Nation. Under the Rural Electrification Act of 1932 and 34, Congress instilled the authority to essentially electrify rural areas across the United States. So, of course, through that act, the entire rural United States was generally electrified. However, Navajo Nation was forgotten, and tribal nations were forgotten. They were not electrified at the same rate that other rural communities were electrified. And thus, the Navajo Nation took its own initiative and said, you know what, we're going to create our own utility authority and exercise our sovereignty to serve our own Navajo people. So NTUA's current service territory is 27,000 square miles, and we provide the following utilities: electricity, water, wastewater treatment, natural gas, and off-grid residential solar. And in more recent years, we've also gone into the realms of communications, which includes broadband internet, mobile phones, and solar energy generation. Okay. This is just a list of our board members. I just want to highlight who our leadership is. NTUA acts much like municipality acts. So when you think of NTUA, we are managed by our management board. They are, many of them are Navajos. Currently, we have 6 out of the 7 members of the board are of Navajo descent, and then we have 1 non-Navajo on the board. As Ryan mentioned, and this is just a screenshot of what our service territory is. So if you think of our footprint on Navajo, think of the state of West Virginia. Okay, so 27,000 square miles sprawling across 3 states. And we have 1 utility, for the most part, we have 1 large utility that covers this entire area. There are other utility providers that cover general pockets, but for the most part, NTUA covers the general vicinity of the Navajo Nation. When you talk about, if you look at these maps, you have, different communities across Navajo. This covers our communications, electric, natural gas, residential solar, water, wastewater services, and renewable energy generation. Okay, so you see how big of a footprint a tribal utility such as NTUA has as far as coverage and services on the Navajo Nation. Okay. We also have 7 district offices and 1 sub-office across the Navajo Nation. We feel that it's better served if we break up and segment our business into districts, just like utility, to provide those services to our customers. As I mentioned, NTUA is the primary service provider on the Navajo Nation. However, there are other utility providers on the nation that provide these utility services. So for example, on the electric side, you have Public Service Company of New Mexico, you have Continental Divide Electric Co-op, Arizona Public Service Company, the city of Farmington, and the city of Gallup. Okay, so those are some of our border towns within the Navajo, that are adjacent to the Navajo Nation, and they provide some services on the outskirts of the Navajo Nation. We also have natural gas providers, propane vendors, and then the Public Service Company of New Mexico also provides natural gas services. And on the water side, we have a few other utility providers that provide these services. Okay. This is just a breakdown of our current employee, our current layout of NTUA employees. So we have 872 employees across NTUA, of which 97% are Navajo. Okay. So one of the big drivers in any type of economic development and collaboration is we want to create economic and job opportunities for our people. And this is one of the drivers that we have is these types of utilities and projects which create permanent full-time jobs for NTUA workers. Okay. This is some stats, and then I'll get into the collaborative efforts between groups. But on the Navajo Nation, these numbers are a little bit outdated, but it says about 186,500 out of the almost 400,000 Navajos live on the Navajo Nation. Okay, so we have about a little less than half, about 45 to 47% of our current Navajo enlisted members that live on the Navajo Nation. Okay. Our current service territory is larger than the state of West Virginia. Our current unemployment rate on Navajo is 48%, which is 9 times the current U.S. average, and 34% of Navajos live below the poverty line. So we have an average per capita income of $10,695. And why we like to at least identify these facts and this information, this data, is because when you have a population as unique as the Navajo Nation and other tribal nations, we need to be cognizant and aware of the importance and necessity of basic utilities and the challenges that we face as far as connecting current tribal members without these basic utilities, without a water line, without electricity, without running water, without natural gas or heating source. So we have a double whammy effect. We have a challenge with them of being able to afford these basic necessities, and we have a challenge in that they don't have these basic necessities currently. Okay? So when we talk about that, 32% of homes on Navajo lack electricity, 86% lack natural gas, 40% lack running water, and 31% lack plumbing. Okay, so we still have a big challenge on Navajo as far as connecting homes with electricity and connecting homes with water and some type of wastewater system. Okay. These are just pictures and overall of the challenges that I mentioned. Some facts that I also want to highlight is approximately 14,000 homes on the Navajo Nation do not have access to electricity currently. Okay. And one of the other challenges without running water and wastewater is we know that thousands of families on Navajo and across the Navajo Nation haul water at least 3 times a week, often driving more than 20 miles one way. Okay, so that takes a toll on time and resources. That takes a toll on vehicle and maintenance, and those are important things for our people that are on the Navajo Nation. Okay, and then the last piece is on the heating source. So if you don't have electricity, or if you don't have natural gas but maybe electricity, you don't have a heating source. So you have to rely on other heating sources, which is either wood or coal for heating and cooking. And another unique thing is on Navajo, the elevation, there are some areas on Navajo which are about 4,500 feet, but for example, Fort Defiance is nearly 7,000 feet. Okay, so we have a high elevation in many of our communities, which means cold winters, and the necessity of heat is extremely important during the winter times. Okay. When we talk about trying to connect homes with electricity is what we're going to focus on right now. As Ryan mentioned, in order to run water to a home, you need to have an electrical source. Okay, so if we put in a water system and a cistern system or a septic system to a home or a water line, you have to have a source to pump that water through the home. Okay, and you need an electrical source. Okay, so you need to have, without electricity, you cannot have water to a home. Okay, and I say that vaguely. I know maybe Emma might have some comments on that, but for the most part, to have a constant source, it's important to have electricity to that home. Okay, so on Navajo, some of the challenges we face is the majority of our homes are on tribal trust land, and we have to go through a very bureaucratic process in order to obtain the rights of way or the land approvals in order to connect those homes. Okay, so on Navajo, the average cost to connect one family is $40,000. Okay, now the majority of that money is actually a big portion of that money is not just the actual labor, materials, and equipment, but it's all of the clearances that are necessary in order to, I'll call it trespass or run a line through tribal trust lands. Okay, you have to get certain biological approvals. You have to get certain cultural approvals, and you have to go through a long, convoluted process in order to connect a home. Okay, and as I mentioned before, that means that 14,000 homes are still without electricity at a cost of $40,000 per home. In order to connect every home on the Navajo Nation with electricity for homes that want to be connected, we're looking at approximately $562 million just for those connections. Okay. And then we have other challenges where we have to make improvements to the system, and that's another $350 million, and then about $100 million for house wiring. So in order to connect all 14,000 homes that are not electrified, we're looking about almost $1 billion in current dollars to connect those homes. Okay. Now, one of the questions is asked is, okay, well, NTUA, we have these challenges. What are you doing about it? So even with NTUA connecting homes, so over the last 15 years, we've connected 7,405 homes on the Navajo Nation with electricity. Okay, so for example, in year 2022, we connected 475. In 2020, we connected 811 homes. One of the biggest challenges we face in connecting homes, as I mentioned before, is getting through the rights of way process. Okay, getting the land approvals. That is our biggest challenge overall. I think one of the key takeaways from us is we understand the importance of working with your tribal government in having a positive relationship in order to understand the process and help each other out through the process. Okay, because if you don't have those approvals for the actual land purposes, it's challenging and it's impossible almost to connect those homes up with electricity. So this is going to be a case study of what we talked about as working with external parties. Okay, so we have 14,000 homes without electricity. We know that. Previously, we had 18,000. We cut it down to 14,000. So how can we partner with outside collaborators or external parties to try to dig into this number that we're trying to battle and try to get our Navajo people electrified and get them with water and other basic utilities? Okay. What we did is we're part of a national group. It's called the American Public Power Association. And our general manager, Walter Haas, was the chairperson a couple years ago. And he went around the United States and explained and gave presentations on the challenges on Navajo. Other communities outside of Navajo, non-tribal nations, their utilities are focused on just operation maintenance. But on the Navajo Nation and many other tribal nations, our focus is on electrifying homes and getting them that necessity that they don't have currently. Okay, and many outside groups weren't aware of these challenges. They thought that the majority of the homes that are not electrified don't exist in the United States. They thought it's in third world countries. Okay, so he presented, and we came up with a collaborative effort with the APPA, American Public Power Association, to have other municipalities come onto Navajo and provide their labor and equipment and materials to electrify homes. Okay, and we called it Light Up Navajo. And the pilot program started off in 2019. Okay, and we had volunteers that represented 13 states across the United States that came onto Navajo from 28 communities across the United States, 138 volunteers that came onto Navajo to electrify homes for the first time. Okay, and this project continued through Light Up Navajo 2 in 2020, and we had these communities that also helped out. With Light Up Navajo and Light Up Navajo 2, 3, 4, and 5, one of the unique things is these are groups who are volunteering their time and effort to help electrify Navajo. Okay, so for the first time, and electrify these homes for the first time. Okay, so one of the things that we notice is that there is a great need, at least in the utility energy sector, to actually help our Navajo people in trying to connect these homes. And we think there's other opportunities for tribal nations, but I think a lot of it is just communication and awareness. Okay. Light Up Navajo 3 happened from April to June in 2022. 14 utilities participated across 10 states with 69 volunteer line workers. And we were able to connect 137 Navajo homes to the electric grid for the first time. Okay. And I don't know how much time I have, Ryan, but I'm going to go, if it's okay to go through one more case study. Okay, I'll just keep on going.
Fine.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll keep on going, and I'll try to hurry up a little bit. Okay, but the other case study I want to talk about is through the federal assistance and I'll just have to focus from the last two administrations. Okay, so from COVID, one of the first big packages that came through the federal government was the CARES Act. Okay, and the CARES Act specifically allocated money to tribal nations to combat COVID-19. Okay, and what Navajo did, at least I'm just going to talk about what Navajo did with a part of their money, is they allocated a certain amount of money for utility infrastructure to connect homes without certain utilities. So when we talked about COVID-19 and combating COVID-19, what was one of the main things that people could do to combat COVID-19? They'd have to wash their hands, right? But if you don't have access to water, how are you able to wash your hands? Okay? So that's some of the ideas and some of the things that we talked about with the Navajo Nation is, you have other outside communities off of tribal nations that are looking to combat COVID with utilities, but on Navajo, we don't even have the basic necessities such as water, electricity to even combat COVID. Okay? So the nation allocated NTUA over $80 million to essentially provide electric, water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure to combat COVID. Okay, so within 4.5 months, NTUA was able to extend electricity to 737 Navajo homes. We installed off-grid residential solar units to 300 homes on the Navajo Nation. We connected 3,100 Navajo homes to internet and broadband, and we activated 42 regional Wi-Fi hotspots. And these hotspots we generally put at chapter houses, or the main areas for the community for those 42 sites. And the reason why we put those in is because Wi-Fi and broadband is extremely important, right? If you have to keep social distancing during this time, how are you able to access basic needs or the internet or broadband if you're working from remote and you don't have internet at home? Well, now you can go to a Wi-Fi hotspot from your car, the safety of your car, and you can either check emails, you can turn in homework, and you can do basic things in a COVID-safe environment. Okay. We also constructed cistern and septic systems for 105 Navajo families, and we built water line and septic systems to 930 Navajo families. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this, but I do want to show a video, and this is related to Light Up Navajo, to talk about just some of the impacts of the importance of collaborating with outside groups, and it'll give you at least a face to some of these groups that we're working with to help Navajo, and trying to extend utility services to our community members. Ryan, is that okay if I share video?
Yes.
Okay, I know I'm running out of time. Thank you for being patient. Let me pull it up real quick.
I could not believe that people did not have power in today's day and age. I was not aware of it.
I didn't even know that people didn't have power in 2019. It's crazy.
I had to pack ice in the ice chest and put my food in there so it won't spoil, and use it with the limit time before it gets bad, or it gets bad and I throw it out.
Here I'm sitting over here and no light. And then my mother used to say, let it be, let it be. It will come. Someday it will come.
Very humbling, you know, we were very, very, very humbling. And it's just a new feeling altogether, unexplainable kind of, you know, and it's just nice. And, you know, all of us linemen, the linemen here, everywhere, all the guys that have come out, you know, we're just very proud to be able to help. I think I can speak for pretty much everybody when I say that.
Apparently there was an illness or something with the family, and the medicine that the child was on needed to be refrigerated. We've got them that power, they've got the refrigeration they need, and that's what I'm here for.
Talk about how she raised her kids there with no power. The kids had to do reading and homework in the dark, and her son came out and was very appreciative. He even had a little light on his hat, ready to do his homework at night. It was pretty amazing.
You know, we're setting brand new pole lines that generations in the future will, you know, be able to have power out here.
The people have been waiting 76 years. Unfortunately, the man that was living there, he had died a month before we had got there, so he never got to see it, but his daughter was there. She got real emotional, really hit home that we got their power for him.
We brought her power. She never had power her whole life, in her 40s. And then when we got her power, the first thing she said, she's like, I'm gonna go grocery shopping for a week so she can keep the food cold. And then she got all teary-eyed. It got me emotional. It was just, one of the best feelings I ever had in my life, just when she could turn on that light switch.
Oh my gosh, thank you guys so much. It was so much weight lifted off my shoulders, my husband's shoulders, and just to provide for our kids, it's a blessing.
And it overwhelms my heart that all people from all different places are here to help me. That is so neat. It makes me want to scream with happiness.
I'm crying because I had our lights. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I went to my house and I turned the switch on and all the lights were on. I was so happy, and I just want to say thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Arash. Like, for myself as an example, I am one of those people who grew up like in a very remote area without running water and electricity myself. And when you grow up and without access to those basic utilities, you don't miss what you don't have, until you visit your relatives that live in the city, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to heat up water for like 30 minutes just to take a bath, and that does create challenges, especially with hygiene. And as the example is given, just washing your hands and dishes. And given the vastness of the reservation, I think we are more hopeful these days. And looking ahead to bring water access to these remote communities and scattered home sites. And one of the ways that we are able to do this is with the collaborations with NGOs such as DigDeep, and with these collaborations, DigDeep is able to assist. And would you like to talk about the work that DigDeep does? Emma, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Arash, for sharing that. So, as I mentioned earlier, DigDeep is a human rights organization that works across the United States. We work in Appalachia, in Las Colonias, in the Rio Grande Valley, and on the Navajo Nation. I am from, a community that didn't have water and still doesn't, and on top of it has a lot of abandoned uranium mines, which is not unique to the western side of the res, it's throughout the Navajo Nation. And so I always knew that I wanted to work in the water world, but obviously it's very difficult on the res because there's not a lot of housing, lack of infrastructure doesn't allow a lot of people to go home and work. And so I always consider myself very fortunate to be able to have that opportunity to serve our community. And so the Navajo Water Project works with the approximate 30%. I know 40% was mentioned, I know 30, 20, everybody has data that we're working on, which I think actually makes a lot of our jobs difficult because it sort of feels like oftentimes in the work that we're doing, bringing infrastructure to the nation, it's like flying an airplane but trying to build it at the same time. And so the work that we do on the Navajo Nation is working with remote families who don't have the potential to be hooked up to a water line, or families who have been on waiting lists for decades. And so we work in several communities. A big part of what I do is building community relationships and making sure that we have on-the-ground partners. These can either be other nonprofit entities or else, the word chapter was mentioned, different chapters, which are local governments, the 110 that you talked about. And so it's really important that we're actually collaborating with the community and involving them, because there are many companies, many organizations that have really great intentions, but might bring technology to the reservation that doesn't make sense. And there's not a lot of operation and maintenance that's thought into it. And on top of it, every chapter on the reservation is different. When Ryan showed the map, he's from down here. Maybe we can show the map so I don't do my, Wheel of Fortune hand moves. But where I'm from is on the western side. So if you want to point that out. So I'm from the western side, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a larger community that had access to electricity and water and sanitation. But you leave the quote-unquote city, and there are so many people who don't have that. So we work in some of the most remote areas. We work on the eastern side in a community called Theru and surrounding chapters there. We work in Dilkon, close to where Ryan is from, and then we work in Natsitzan or Navajo Mountain, which is on the Utah-Arizona border. And that community is very hard to work in because of things like Ryan mentioned. They're in 3 counties, they're in 2 states, we work with the tribal government, and so that can be really difficult. And the solutions that we're doing is we're installing 1,200-gallon cistern systems that are refilled by water trucks, so that way families are getting access to safe water. A lot of times we'll see that relatives that we work with are hauling water from unsafe sources. And either they might not know that those water sources are unsafe because of lack of signage, whether that's from the government or communities not being able to have the opportunity to do that. And that's actually one of the harder things that we run into is because of the drought and water rights issues right now. But so we install these off-grid systems filled up by a series of water trucks. And we're also helping families get hooked up to water lines. As Arash mentioned, there are so many fees that go into different clearances for home site leases. And that can be very costly, and a lot of families can't pay that money. We also assist with utility bill payment. During the pandemic, there was a moratorium on shutoffs, but obviously utility companies need to make money, and so a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic, or the data that Arash showed with income that families have. So we also assist with bill pay. And we also partnered with Navajo Technical University, which is a university on the New Mexico side of the reservation, to build a wet plumbing lab. And there aren't a lot of plumbers on the reservation, and so that way we're making sure that people are prepared to be able to come back to our communities and do things like repair water lines or install septic systems. Lastly, and I think this is a good example of collaboration, one of my favorite projects that we've ever done is working with a school called SMAES, which is St. Michael's Association for Special Education. And they had water infrastructure, they were hooked up to an NTUA line, but they were at the end of the line, and they didn't have a flush valve, and so there was a lot of, for lack of a better way to say it, gunk that was building up and coming out of their pipes. And on top of it, the school hadn't received an infrastructure update since the early 70s. So we worked to update their infrastructure, to get them new water heaters, to get them sinks, and install that flush valve and new fixtures. And that was a really important project because it was a larger school. We worked with 20 buildings, and the school has an adult program as well. So that way people are living there 24/7. Some people don't go home on the weekends, and some people have medical needs that require medical grade water. So that was not only my favorite project because we got to really work with the school. It was a 3-year project because it really did involve getting involved in the community and the school's programs and making sure that we were following through with our plans. But we also worked with NTUA and one of the engineers there to work with the piped water that they had, and then worked with the tribal government. And during the height of the pandemic, we also saw that those relationships carried over by forming the Water Access Coordination Group, which NTUA is a part of, which Ryan's department is a part of, which other NGOs and universities are a part of. And that's been very exciting and honestly a silver lining of the pandemic, to be able to come together and say, along with like IHS and other feds, is that there's this big puzzle and there are all these pieces that go into it to solve this lack of water. So who's going to take on what problem and come up with what solution? Linking it all back together, data is important, and we can talk about the problems as much as we want, but now we need to actually implement these solutions. And so our project is Dineh-led, and again, really making sure that we're being a part of the community and tailoring these projects for them is a big part of what we do.
Yes, and working with the community is one of those big tasks that I would like to emphasize, because if you don't involve the community or have the support of the local chapter, especially. Just keeping them informed and providing them updates, so that way you can empower the local community themselves and get them engaged with the process of bringing utilities to their local communities. And when we talk about water infrastructure, it's kind of like a three-legged stool idea where IHS, the Indian Health Service, through their Office of Environmental Engineering, puts together projects for funding for water infrastructure and also off-site cisterns and septic systems. So there's IHS and there's NTUA also, who does water infrastructure also. Then there's the Navajo Department of Water Resources, who does contribute to water infrastructure projects on the Navajo Nation. And because we are in 3 different states, the funding for these projects that the Navajo Nation has comes from multiple sources. Like in the state of New Mexico, they have what they call our TIF funds, Tribal Infrastructure Funding, and I forget what the other F is, but that's funding from the state that is competitive, and it's available to all the other pueblos and native tribes within the state of New Mexico. So they apply for these fundings for water infrastructure projects. Like an example would be a chapter, their water wastewater system needs to be upgraded. So they would apply for funding for that to happen. And a role that the Navajo Department of Water Resources plays in that is to help manage those fundings and making sure that the reporting is submitted on time to the state of New Mexico, and also verifying that the work is being completed and meets the specifications. So just with water infrastructure, there are three ways, and also with the involvement of nonprofits such as DigDeep. And an example of this that I would like to touch on next is the outside of the Navajo Nation. We are going next to okay, so this is Blanding, Utah. And once the lag catches up. So we see the reservation boundaries, but as you know, we've always lived like outside of those areas and had communities that were not within the boundaries. And an example of this is in Utah. This is the Westwater subdivision. It is 120 acres, and originally it was land that was owned by the Bureau of Land Management, but there were Navajo families who had been living there for many years before 1986. And what the BLM did was sell that property to the Navajo Nation. So it's 120 acres with 29 lots, and it's held in fee status, simple fee status. So given that it's in the state of Utah, outside of the city boundaries of Blanding City and within San Juan County, it's been maybe over 30 years since the efforts began to bring electricity and water to this community. And recently, just to go back to collaboration, we have recently made a lot of progress. So going back to Arash and was previously mentioned about electricity. And okay, so here is the Westwater subdivision that is on the west side of Blanding. And if you look on the right side, that is Westwater Creek, which is where the community gets its name from. And on the left side of the creek is the subdivision. And in the background, that is Blue Mountain, one of the sacred mountains for the Navajo. So back in 1986, the land was purchased and the efforts began. And working with many partners like Hearts and Hands and other nonprofits who provided in-kind services to construct the homes, they were able to construct 21 homes out of the 29 lots. So recently, as of September 1st, what you're seeing in this picture is NTUA on the bottom center electrifying the community on September 1st of last year. So the way that worked was a 3-phase extension from the city of Blanding across Westwater Creek into the subdivision, and then from there a master meter, and then the electric distribution system within the subdivision. And that is the first time that they received landline electricity. And prior to that, NTUA did provide solar panels and wind generators to the community while we were working through all the processes to bring the electric distribution system to the Westwater community. And building upon this success of this, and with the many stakeholders that we have here, so we have different groups: the Navajo Nation, the State of Utah, the State of Utah Navajo Trust Fund, and the Utah Navajo Trust Fund is very unique because they are a kind of a independent agency within the state of Utah, and they get their funding from royalties from oil in that area. So they get a pot of money that they can use for the Utah Navajos, which they called it like the Utah Strip. So they were able to use some of that funding to contribute to the electric line extension into the Westwater community, along with funding from the state of Utah and the Church of Jesus Christ, who also provided some funding support. And of course, we couldn't have done this without Blanding City, whose electric infrastructure was the pass-through to get the electricity to the city of Blanding, and of course, the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, IHS, and San Juan County, and DigDeep. And this is, once you get into the minutia of working with so many stakeholders, you begin to realize, NGOs and nonprofits do have a role, or can have a role to assist in this processes. And RCAC, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I would like to thank DigDeep for some of their initial funding, because earlier we were talking about rights of ways and all the permitting that needs to go on. And one of the setbacks for this community was they did not have home site leases. And to get a home site lease, you have to do like an ARC survey, get it legally surveyed, and all of those to get a home site lease. Because NTUA only provides utility services on the Navajo Nation to those who have a home site lease. So that was like one of the main hurdles just to get the for the Westwater community to be electrified. And DigDeep has been very generous and providing the backing for a PER, a preliminary engineering report for the water distribution system, and also to fund the legal land survey. And I know, Emma, that your involvement and DigDeep's involvement, what has been your experience with DigDeep and the other projects across the Navajo Nation of more scattered home housing and this project?
Right, was that question directed at me, or who was that question directed to?
It's me. Yeah, no. Thanks for rephrasing that for me. So, as I mentioned, the work that we've been doing off-grid is very different than a project like this. And the way that we fit into this is there are experts like Ryan and his colleagues and other people, other entities that are named up here. And so we came in to assist with that funding because we want to be able to help on larger scale projects. I mentioned SMAES earlier, which was really great. And I want us to continue to be able to help multiple people, not just homes that are off-grid as well, but larger communities like this. And so, we did a very small amount of work when it came to this. And I think everybody has a role in the solutions and in the fight, and that just happened to be our role, was coming in with that and putting the assistance and the support in the hands of people who knew how to work in larger scale like this.
Thank you. And I know when we talk about infrastructure, we tend to mainly look at it through like hygiene and access, but not having access to utilities also has an effect on your well-being and other aspects of your life. And part of that is it gives you more time to reflect on your life and take on other endeavors, such as the creative part of yourself if you're not hauling water like 3 times a week. And an example from the Westwater community, once they became electrified, one of the residents was very excited for the electricity because she could stay with her grandson, and her grandson could do his homework at night instead of using like a kerosene lamp, which causes strain for your eyes, but also allows you to pursue more artistic tasks. And I know, Emma, besides being the executive director for the water project, that you are also passionate about other works that you do and how it connects to water and is more rounded and includes expression through art. So with your other projects, how has that influenced or have been influenced on the Navajo Water Project?
Yeah, so I'm also an artist. I'm a practicing artist. I make a lot of artwork that is based around treaties and things like missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And I always think that there needs to be an educational component of what I do, but also, like all of us natives, an element of humor as well. And so the work that I make is about specifically the 18 Lost Treaties of California is a series that I'm working on right now, and how water is related to that and how it's affected. I come from the art world. Before I started working in the water world, I was directing a gallery in Chicago, and I mentioned that I really wanted to come home and do something back on the res. And so I've found a way, I feel like, to combine the art world and working in community with Navajos and other Native peoples in California by starting another nonprofit called the Chapter House. And we're based in Los Angeles. We do online programming, and we consider ourselves a Native space welcoming all. And that really came from working in community, and like you said, Ryan, seeing what happens when people have basic needs and how we're able to care for ourselves in other ways. I think something that we really need to start thinking about is not constantly being in this survival mode. I feel like to be Native, and I'm sure many others can agree here, in 2023, oftentimes we find ourselves in moments of feeling insecure. And I want to make sure that we're moving from that insecurity and moving from survival mode to thriving. And I think that's what we've seen when we can do things like get our relatives basic needs like water, electricity, internet connectivity, road infrastructure improvement. And, like Ryan mentioned, if you don't have water, you're having to haul water all the time, and it's this whole mental burden. And there's also this, feeling of otherization. If you're in communities with other folks who do have water, and they say you're school-aged and somebody comes to school and they were able to take a shower that morning, but you aren't, you don't feel like everybody else, and that's a problem. And that's something that we need to change because, it's 2023, and we shouldn't just be worrying about that. We didn't have running water before the pandemic, and we still don't have it. So it's something where it's not like the pandemic hit and all of a sudden, oh my God, the Navajo Nation doesn't have these things or other nations don't have it. It was highlighted by that because of not being able to wash our hands and because of not being able to socially distance when we had to go and haul water and buy water, especially off reservations in places like Arizona that never had a mask mandate. But it's something that I, as a Navajo woman and as a mother and as an aunt, I don't want future generations or even myself to have to worry about my family and what they're gonna do because they don't have water in their home. It's something where it's not just about getting people water so that they can do basic things, but it's like, let's shift from that. Let's not be in that insecurity anymore. So that's how I work with it, and that's why I think it's really important that we push for this infrastructure outside of everything else. Mental health is something that we know is so affected in Native communities, and so when we get these basic necessities, we're able to move to that thriving mode.
Yes, so as Emma mentioned, the future and looking towards the future, what this also involves is the community and building community capacity. Because once they begin to have access to infrastructure, you can work on community building and branch off of that into to branch off of that and ensure that your children have electricity so they can do their homework, and that has like a longer term impact on education and how successful you can be. Because if you're doing your homework at night, or you have all these other chores just to haul water and all of that, and all that goes into that. So part of this is also to empower the local community and go beyond just like just having it like a basic necessity. Are there any, in the work that you've done, Arash, with electricity, what examples have you encountered with your work?
Those are good points. I mean, I didn't highlight, and I think I should have highlighted a little further, the relationship with the chapters and community members. And that's key and that's important. I mean, that's a huge stakeholder. When you look at a global perspective of utilities and, connecting infrastructure up, at least from the NTUA, and I'm sure from a DigDeep perspective, I won't speak for them, but our true objective and initiative is to provide basic necessities, i.e. utilities, water, wastewater, electricity, to our Navajo community members. And you can even, put that even further to, other tribal nations have that responsibility as well. So when we structure any type of infrastructure development, we have to make sure that one of the key stakeholders, which is the community members in the local communities, is at the table and we understand what their needs are. Because in the end, we can provide technical data as far as what can and can't be done as far as infrastructure development, but we need the feedback of community members in order to provide those necessities. So from NTUA's perspective, we spend a lot of time with the local communities, i.e. the chapters or the chapter houses and their officials, to identify the needs within that community. One of the challenges, for example, that we face is we don't have a good count of who does and doesn't have these basic utilities. We don't know, sometimes we don't have an accurate count in communities of who does and doesn't have electricity or running water or access to wastewater. So we have to work with the community officials in identifying who is at need for our services and how we can work and collaborate with them. So I think that's important from our perspective in making sure we have that open communication with community members. And number one, we understand their wants and needs, and they vice versa are educated to understand what can and can't be done. For example, with the drought that was happening before and is still going on, even though we've had quite a bit of moisture, we still have challenges with getting water, running water pipeline to certain communities. There are, the challenges overall. And I know DigDeep has some solutions, and we also have some solutions, but we have to educate the chapter in what can and can't be done and have them understand and work together in some of those relations. And same with electricity. When you have, when they're looking to develop some type of convenience store and it's 5 miles away from the closest electric line, we need to work with them to say it's better situated to build in this area because you have better access to utilities and whatnot. So we have to have that collaboration, both sides, and that relationship. And I think when we talk about key stakeholders, local community members is key in having that communication and collaboration with the local communities.
Thanks for mentioning that, Arash. I just wanted to build off of that because I think it's exactly that, right? Like the Navajo Nation is so unique, like every reservation or every state or every community, and it's working with the community members, like you said, to identify who has the highest need or who might need the services first, because I think we both know people are experts in their own experiences, and that's like the successes that we've seen when we actually include people and we're not bringing copy and paste solutions. I don't know if you've run into this, but one of the biggest problems that I have is when we're trying to explain to people in the US, whether those are funders, partners, people who are doing similar work, that this is a sovereign nation, that we are, a lot of times we work with people in the international WASH sector, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and they might say, well, this worked in sub-Saharan Africa, so it's going to work here because it's similar climate. But a difference that I see for people who are working in the international WASH sector is there is so much money, time, and resources involved when working in other countries, but those resources aren't always put back into communities in the United States or on Native nations, and that's something that I always urge people as well who are interested in that, make sure you're doing that exact same work in research and community engagement, because those are difficult conversations to have, as I'm sure Ryan and Arash can attest, is telling somebody it's not the best solution for you to live near this uranium mine for many reasons. And I know this is your traditional homeland, but if you want electricity, you might need to relocate 5 miles. So branching off of that, instead of just saying, I'm going to tell you where you need to live or I'm going to tell you what you need to do, it's about figuring out how to have these difficult conversations as well and making sure that people are getting what they need, but also what they want.
Thank you, Emma. And I forgot to mention at the top that now Arash just have a hard stop at 4:45, correct?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for, well, it's 4:44. So thank you for joining the panel, Arash, and thank you for your time. And you have a good rest of your evening and a good meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are talking about electricity, and now that the Westwater community has been electrified, the next focus for the community is to build out the water infrastructure. Okay, so what you are looking at is the blue lines of the water distribution system within the city of Blanding, and now the next step for all of us, working with all the stakeholders, is to extend the water distribution line from the city of Blanding into the Westwater subdivision. And within the Westwater subdivision, the green lines are where they are still planning to build out the water distribution system within the community. So that is the next step that we are working on with the stakeholders. And the very good news recently was that by the end of April, well, let me step back. So the way this project worked is the state of Utah and the Navajo Nation and other funders came together and that we would drill a new deep well for the city of Blanding and provide an arsenic treatment plant, which benefits the Blanding of city because it will be able to provide more water to the city of Blanding in times of drought and just build a more resilient system, while at the same time providing water to the Westwater community. And in that area, you have to drill down to the Navajo aquifer about 1,500 feet down, and given the geology of this area, it's like a 50% chance that there might be high levels of arsenic. So part of this project is to do the water quality testing and seeing if there is a need for a arsenic treatment plant, which will be great, a win-win for the city of Blanding and the Westwater subdivision. And in these rural areas right now, it's also a safety issue because the Westwater community does not have fire extinguishers on their property. So, but now with this new water infrastructure, if there's a fire, there'll be fire hydrants to put out fires before, the county will be like, okay, here's our tank. I guess we ran out of water, So there are safety hazards that are being addressed with this, also with this. With the water project side of this. Are there any questions?
Hi, Buju. I'm Aurora Conley from Bad River, Wisconsin, Lake Superior region. I have lots of questions, like simple things. One, can we find that video that he showed? I thought that was so great.
Yes, we can share that. There is a link for it. So
thank you. And I really am interested in what you said about the mental health impacts, and I want to know if you guys have, como se dice, compounded that into some sort of you know what I mean? I expressed here is as emotional as it is, and through the video, yes, but how do you express that on paper? How do you express that to some of the stakeholders, that type of importance, right? And what that would mean for a community? This isn't just running a line in the ground, this is beyond that kind of comprehension. So I just wanted a few tips on that. And just wanted to thank you, and Miigwech, thank you.
I think that's a great question, and one that I can start to answer. I think a perfect example is how you started out by asking how you could get access to that video. Like, I think as, you know, at least with Navajos, I can only speak for Navajos, I can't speak for other tribes, but I think we're such a visual culture that when you can come up with storytelling, and I will emphasize dignified storytelling, working in the nonprofit sector and the human rights sector, I am tired of white saviorism in 2023. I'm tired of the Save the Children video. I'm sure so many other people are as well. And so we need to be able to tell stories and show people that. I think maybe the word is quantified might be the way to talk about it. Like, how do we quantify that? Definitely deeply rooted. Obviously, in the US, there's this huge disconnect with mental health and physical health. It's always like mental health, physical health, they don't impact each other. They do. Like, there should not be a division. Everything matters. Somebody's working on a dissertation about that out there, I'm sure. But I think it's about dignified storytelling and telling these stories from our own points of view. And I think giving examples where it's like Ryan said, I mean, gosh, is homework the only way to measure it? I hated homework growing up. So I'm sure there's some other things like you can bead, or you can play video games, or you can be on TikTok. You know, these are examples that I'm too old for TikTok, but I know there are a lot of people who, you know, native TikTok is a really big thing, and that brings people joy when you can charge a cell phone and you can make humorous videos. I think the first answer for me would be storytelling, dignified storytelling, storytelling from ourselves, for ourselves. And also stopping this otherization, like, oh, you don't have water, poor you, you know, it's more like, how do we make this work together? And I still haven't figured out how to explain that to the communities that we work with, or with the funders, or donors, or whoever else. So I think it's a process, and again, it's one of those things where we're like not even totally aware of how much there's so much data missing that we don't even know the data of the mental health. Like, we know that there are crises on Native nations, like suicide, unfortunately, or things like that. And I don't think, as far as I know, I don't know if anybody knows if there have been any studies that link to lack of infrastructure or water or electricity. But we all know that when you can take a hot shower, you're a lot happier. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, with storytelling, sometimes it can be difficult to convey exactly how you feel. Like, an example I would give is with our traditional stories and cultural landscapes. Like, how do you convey that information to someone who is non-Indian, besides saying, oh, first woman was created on this view, and this is why, like, it is sacred. It is part of my worldview and how I view the world. And sometimes it can feel like that, communicating with stakeholders, of trying to convey the cultural landscape and how it has an influence on your life and your worldview. Besides saying, like, it gives me more than warm, fuzzy feelings, you know, which is not very helpful. But sometimes it can feel like that, of trying to express the meaningfulness of all of it. Do you have a question?
Yes, hello. My colleagues and I, we have a unique situation, and I know that water is a necessity, but also burying our people is a necessity. So we're working on a cemetery that's going to be governed by the tribes first in the whole entire tribal lands. We've never had our specific own. It's always been ran or funded by the churches or the state or whichever, or the what do you call the local people? The city, by the city. So we came to this panel because you're talking about the different collaborations of different stakeholders. Our stakeholders are so diverse. They're the non-natives, the natives, the local government, the engineers who are not native, and trying to, when they need to create or design a cemetery, they have to follow a certain standard, whichever. But us, on the other side of the table, expressing, well, we still want to hire you, or you're the only choice, if that. But this is what we want. Maybe we don't want a square, rectangle cemetery. You know, maybe we want a round one, or maybe we want, don't want to use the, what are the cemented things called again? The vaults. You know, maybe we don't want the vaults. Maybe when we do our burial practices, maybe it's just back to star quilts and buffalo robes. You know, so there's so many different policies, procedures that each stakeholder has a voice in. But the most confusing part is trying to establish and finalize the policy and procedure, because now we have different background, religious, tribal members, we have cultural practitioners, we have non-tribal people who are looking for a place for their people to be buried. In all of our cemeteries across the Indian Reservation, and I think we have 13 burial or cemeteries, and they're getting overfilled. So we have one central cemetery that's going to be ran by the tribes, and there's this various amount of diverse stakeholders. We've just hosted 2 or 3 community meetings, and it still feels like it's all up in the air, because everybody has a say in how they want to bury somebody. This is the places that there used to be cemeteries. That's just, we never had a say then. We never had a voice, tribal people. So now that the tribes are making their own cemetery, now we do have a voice, but it's also the state regulations, whichever are hanging over people's heads, the engineers and their standards, whichever. So if you had anything that paralleled with your getting water and electricity to the Navajo Nation, you know, have you paralleled anything like that with the diverse tribal members, the backgrounds, and then also the stakeholders who may not be native or have a indigenous perspective of how they need to change standards for the benefit of the tribes? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. So my role with the wastewater project is to manage both the electric and water side with all the stakeholders. And what I do is communicate with them often and frequently, and also being very transparent is absolutely important. And so that way you can build trust with all the stakeholders, and being firm with what you would like for the outcomes, especially with bringing on contractors and working with them. Because the thing is, with a lot of these water infrastructure projects, we don't have the capacity to do all that work, so we do have to bring on contractors for that, and a lot of that includes working with many stakeholders, like memorandums of understanding and agreement, and with the tribe, I think where we've just gotten used to working with so many stakeholders and just building off of the success of previous projects, and having that understanding that we will work in good faith. And I guess it's just a lot of talking and just focusing on what has worked previously for other projects. So yeah, do you have anything?
I'm super excited about this project that you're working on. I didn't get what tribe you're from or what tribal nation you're working on.
We're from the Fort Peck Assiniboine Sioux tribe.
Oh, one of my best friends is from Fort Peck. So this is like so unique, the work that y'all are doing, and I thank you for that, because I think exactly what you're saying, like it feels like us as Native peoples, we have to sort of take this and fit it into this box, and that doesn't work for us. And I think the work that you're doing is so traditionally based. And for me, like I don't run into a lot of that in terms of the way that we need to tailor things. There's one specific example that I can think of that is a pretty small one, but we were burying these cisterns, and in some of the places that we work, the sediment is so thick, and it started to take days to bury a cistern. And so one of the solutions, don't get me started on those engineers, I know what you're talking about. I'm sure they're cool engineers in here, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Was one of the solutions was, well, let's just bury it. Let's just make a mound. And for us Navajos, you know, death is so taboo. It's just something you don't talk about. We don't go into cemeteries after somebody passes. There are just so many things that go along with it. And so this example isn't actually meant like related to the work that you're doing, but this is just one that we've run into. So the homeowner came out and said, I don't want this. This is like a grave in my yard. I don't like the way that it looks visually. And, you know, the person that we were working with was not Navajo, was not Native, and they said, well, what else do they want? We can't bury it. It has to be buried below the freeze line. It gets really cold, as we saw, 6,000, 7,000 feet above sea level, but this was the solution that we came up with, was that it was gonna be insulated with the mound. And it was something that took going back to this engineer and saying, this isn't acceptable, and these are the reasons why. Culturally, it's not okay to have somebody or, you know, something resembling a burial ground in your home. And it was a lot of back and forth. And I feel like what I did there was talk to my dad, like, how do I communicate that? My dad and I kind of work in similar fields. He works for the BIA and with natural resources, and I know a large part of what he does is having to act as an intermediary and talking between people. This is something traditional, but it doesn't fit into what you're saying. So in the end, we really, unfortunately, couldn't come up with anything else except that, because the sediment was just way too thick. And so we had to tell the homeowner, we can't do it. And the homeowner wanted it removed, so we came up with a different system where it was something that was above ground. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, but it was something that really involved a lot of honesty, like you said, in conversations, because I wouldn't want to live near that either, and I understand it. When I think about your situation and the uniqueness of it, I'm automatically like, involve the elders, get a vocal mean auntie in there, get them to speak out. But I think stakeholders, like the ones that you're mentioning, oftentimes need hard data, and they need presentations, and they need maybe a committee that comes together and says, we've already consulted all of these people, you want a packet of information, here you go. So sometimes it's kind of like playing by other people's rules, if that makes sense. But again, like yours is so unique because it's culturally tailored, and it's not necessarily like installing a water line. There's a filmmaker whose name is Robbins, and she's working on something about traditional burials on the Navajo Nation. I really want to get your information afterwards, because she might actually have some ideas thinking about it. But thank you for that work, and I apologize if my answer isn't the best there, but I think it is about honesty, like you said. It's about tailoring things for what people need, and unfortunately playing by their rules sometimes. I hope that helps.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session.
Thank you.